Hey guys, tonight we slip through the fog toward a monastery that's been standing for nearly 900 years. The air smells of damp stone and beeswax, and somewhere beyond the walls a single bell tolls, low and slow, as if marking time for ghosts. You can almost taste the silence, thick, patient, and faintly sweet with candle smoke. You probably wouldn't survive the schedule that keeps this place alive, but don't worry. You're just visiting. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know your location and local time down in the comments. I like picturing where you're listening from. Tiny glowing dots scattered across the night. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The gate creaks open, and you step inside. The gravel path crunches under your shoes as the last light leaks out of the sky. The monastery looks almost asleep already. Narrow windows glowing faintly, a shape of stone and discipline. It's not a grand cathedral meant to impress kings. It's a working house of faith. You smell smoke from the kitchen chimney, hear the clink of buckets in the dairy, and sense that everything here runs according to some ancient rhythm you're not yet part of. You follow that rhythm to the cloister walk, a covered passage framing a square of grass and herbs. A single monk passes, hood drawn, sandals whispering. He nods, but doesn't speak. You try to nod back, awkwardly, as if silence itself has manners you don't yet understand. It's here that your education begins. You're about to find out why medieval monks were so obsessed with rules, with cheese, with silence, with schedules, and, most mysteriously, with doing everything very, very slowly. The modern world teaches speed, this world rewards patience. You can feel your heartbeat trying to match theirs, slowing slightly as the bell rings again in the distance. The abbey at dusk isn't merely peaceful. It's an organism. You can almost hear it breathe, the murmur of psalms behind thick walls. The drip of wax onto stone, the flutter of parchment turning somewhere deep inside. And though the monks would never phrase it like this, their entire life is one long experiment in balance, between the divine and the dairy, the sacred and the frankly smelly. Inside the main hall, flickering candles paint halos around faces carved by routine. You notice how everything here seems both severe and oddly tender. The rough wool robes, the sandaled feet, the hands stained with ink or milk or both. They move like sleepwalkers, but purposeful ones, every gesture deliberate. A friar gestures for you to sit near the refectory door. The air hums with the faint scent of onion stew, and something cheesier beneath it. You realize you're hearing a kind of soundless conversation. Glances traded, slight nods, the shuffle of bowls. These people haven't spoken all day, maybe all week, yet everything still gets done. This is what silence looks like when it works. It's not emptiness, it's choreography. And at the heart of that rhythm sits the reason you came the quiet industry of monastic life, which somehow turned poverty into self-sufficiency and prayer into a surprisingly robust food business. Somewhere behind the walls, cows low softly. You picture their milk being strained, salted, pressed into wheels by hands that might later lift those same hands in prayer. Cheese here isn't comfort food. It's obedience in edible form. You'll get to that soon enough. But for now, you're still learning the setting. The abbey itself. Historians still argue whether monasteries were refuges from the chaos outside or factories of divine order inside. Maybe both. You can imagine a medieval peasant trudging up the hill, watching the abbey lamps glow in the mist, thinking those lucky men inside, safe and fed. But inside, those same men thought those poor souls outside, free and noisy. A rat scurries along the cloister edge. Even it seems respectful, pausing when the bell tolls again. You glance up and realize the sky is already night, blue, scattered with a few defiant stars. The bell you hear isn't just marking the hour, it's commanding the entire place. Each toll divides prayer from work, sleep from labor, silence from song. The sound vibrates through your ribs. You can imagine hearing it every few hours, forever, until your thoughts themselves ring in time. That's what happens here. The world outside dissolves, leaving only this schedule, this stone, this hush. A brother leads you through the dormitory. Wooden cots line the walls, each with a rough blanket and maybe a single candle stub. No decorations, no privacy, no clutter. Just sleep, when the bell allows. You run your hand over one of the bed frames. It's smooth from centuries of identical gestures. Men lying down at the same angle, rising at the same sound. You pass into the chapel. The air feels alive with breath, though no one speaks. Candles shiver. Above, painted saints stare downward with patient eyes. You sit, trying to feel what they feel. Some blend of exhaustion and purpose. A few monks kneel, motionless except for their fingers turning beads. And then, softly, chant begins. It's low, rippling, hypnotic. A Gregorian hum that fills every crevice of the chapel. You can't tell if the sound starts outside you or inside your head. This is what silence becomes when it finally needs to say something. The chant moves through you, and for a moment you understand the lure of this place. Out there, life is noise and negotiation. In here, it's pure rhythm. You could spend hours doing nothing but listening to air vibrating between stone columns. There's something ironic, of course. You're standing in a world built on renunciation, yet it's overflowing with creation. They make cheese, beer, ink, manuscripts, gardens, all from the belief that labor itself can be holy. You can almost hear a modern wellness guru nodding in approval. You catch a faint smell of curdling milk again, drifting even here in the chapel. It's strangely comforting, like holiness with a hint of lunch. One monk coughs softly, another adjusts his robe. You realize these are real people, not icons. Somewhere between prayer and production. They have lives, tired ones, maybe hungry ones, but real. A fact most people miss. Monasteries were some of the earliest self-contained economies. They grew their own food, bred their own animals, and traded their surplus cheese, and all for books and candles. Some orders grew so efficient that kings envied them. Yet officially, they owned nothing. Every possession belonged to God, which must have made bookkeeping interesting. There's a gentle humor in it. Imagine signing your tax forms, property of the Almighty. You walk toward the cloister garden, following the flicker of a lantern. The air cools, rich with the scent of mint and damp soil. A monk bends over a patch of leeks, his breath visible in the cold. He hums a psalm under his breath, and when he looks up, his smile is tired but peaceful. It's here, among the herbs and stones, that you start to feel what keeps them going. This life is brutally repetitive, yet within that repetition lies something freeing. You don't have to choose. The bell tells you when to work, when to pray, when to rest. The silence protects you from gossip. The cheese, believe it or not, connects you to the rhythm of the earth. You think about your own life, notifications, deadlines, the illusion of choice, and you almost envy the simplicity. Almost. You wouldn't want the 3 a.m. prayers, or the winter fasting, or the smell of sheep's milk clinging to your hands. But the peace, that's hard to ignore. As night deepens, the abbey falls into full silence. Even the cows settle. Somewhere in the dark, a small wheel of cheese sweats gently on a wooden rack, doing its quiet work of becoming. In a way, that's the perfect image for the monastic world: transformation through patience. Devotion through doing the same thing every single day, until it glows from within. The candle in your hand burns low. You hear a door latch behind you. A monk glides past, extinguishing flames one by one. Soon only the moonlight remains, silvering the cloister stones. You breathe in the chill air. and for a fleeting second, you could swear you belong here. One more quiet figure moving through the ordered dark. Tomorrow, you'll rise before dawn with them. You'll learn how silence isn't absence, but language. And somewhere between prayers and curds, you'll start to taste the slow secret of why these monks do what they do. Dawn hasn't even decided whether it wants to exist yet when the bell wakes you. It's not a gentle sound. It's iron against iron, deep and ancient, shaking the cold air apart. You roll off the narrow cot and immediately feel the stone floor bite your feet. Around you, other figures rise in silence, wrapping themselves in rough robes. No words, no yawns, just movement. You follow them, half dreaming, half freezing, through corridors where torchlight flickers against damp walls. The chant begins again. Low, patient, timeless. And for a moment, you forget that it's still the middle of the night. The monastery is alive, but in a strange, underwater way. Everything happens slowly, muffled, deliberate. You try to whisper something, maybe a good morning. But the monk beside you raises a finger to his lips. You remember no talking. You're entering the world of the great silence. This isn't metaphorical silence. It's institutional, enforced, engineered. Most monasteries followed a version of the rule of Saint Benedict, which laid down hundreds of instructions for daily life, including when to pray, when to eat, and, crucially, when to shut up. The idea wasn't punishment, it was focus. Words, they believed, distracted from God. And distraction was the gateway to sin. You imagine a medieval monk explaining this to you with saintly patience. Talking leads to gossip, gossip to pride, pride to downfall. You can't help thinking he'd make an excellent HR manager. But here's the odd part: the silence isn't total. It's perforated. There were loopholes, and monks, being human, found every single one. You shuffle into the cloister where daylight finally brushes the arches in thin gold. A line of brothers passes by with baskets of bread. They don't speak, but you notice the subtle hand gestures. Small, coded signals passed like invisible sentences. One finger across the lips means quiet, a redundant, but reassuring. A tap on the shoulder, two fingers curved, might mean bring cheese. A palm up and opened could mean help me carry this. Monks invented what historians now call monastic sign languages, rudimentary systems that let them communicate basic needs without technically breaking the silence. A kind of medieval Slack channel, really. Some abbeys had entire manuals of gestures, complete with regional dialects. You imagine a traveling monk showing up, signing cheese when he means water, and causing a small theological scandal. Historians still argue whether the silence was more spiritual than practical. Maybe it was both. In a world where everyone else shouted to be heard, markets, courts, towns full of clanging iron and barking dogs, the monastery became a vacuum of noise. Inside, the absence of sound wasn't emptiness. It was space for thought. As you sit in the chapel for the morning service, you start to feel it. The quiet has weight. Your mind fills the space that words usually clutter. You start noticing the things silence amplifies: the shuffle of robes, the creak of wooden pews, the tiny gasp when a candle flares too high. Even your breathing becomes part of the rhythm. A monk kneels beside you, eyes closed, lips moving soundlessly. You wonder what he's saying. Maybe a prayer, maybe a grocery list. You'll never know, and somehow that mystery feels sacred. After the service, the monks file into the refectory for breakfast. Still no talking. A reader stands at a wooden pulpit, reciting passages from scripture while everyone else eats in silence. The soundscape is strange: spoon against bowl, a sniff, a throat being quietly cleared. And then the low monotone of the reader's voice, echoing through steam and morning breath. You glance down at your bowl, porridge with a drizzle of honey. Simple, humble, filling. The monks eat slowly, heads bowed, as though every spoonful were an act of gratitude. You, being new to this, eat too fast and immediately feel self-conscious about it. You slow down. Everything slows down. After the meal, dishes are cleaned, floors swept, all without conversation. You start to realize that silence here isn't about suppressing speech, it's about purifying it. When they do speak, well, it matters. Words here cost something, so they're spent carefully. Outside, the sun finally climbs over the cloister wall. The garden glitters with dew, and the bell rings again. It's time for labor, the heart of monastic life. You follow the monks toward the dairy, where a cool mist smells faintly of cream and hay. One monk motions for you to help turn a great wooden press. It's heavy, ancient, polished smooth by centuries of identical hands. The silence between you is oddly companionable. You can almost feel your heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of the work. Squeeze, turn, lift, repeat. Somewhere deep in the abbey, another monk sneezes. The sound echoes like thunder in the hush. A few heads turn, and one brother grins. Not mockingly, but in solidarity. You realize that even in silence, humor survives. And it has to. You imagine trying to go weeks or months without chatting, without venting about the weather or the smell of the cows. So they found ways to keep themselves sane, subtle smiles, shared glances, and occasionally rule-breaking. A whispered joke here, a muttered amen. There's a story, half legend, half record, about a monk in 12th century Burgundy who kept accidentally talking in his sleep. The abbot, frustrated, made him wear a wooden sign that read, "Silent, even in dreams." You can't help laughing softly at that, though your laugh dies quickly in the cold air. In truth, the rule of silence wasn't universal. Some orders, like the Benedictines, kept long stretches of quiet, but allowed speech during work or recreation. Others, like the Carthusians, went almost full mute, months of total stillness, except for chants. You can imagine how loud a single dropped bucket must have sounded there. You begin to see how silence itself became a kind of identity. Monks were known for it, like how knights were known for swords. It was their badge, their brand. Visitors expected it, even respected it. If a monk did speak, people listened. Their words carried weight because they came from stillness. And yet, there's something undeniably human beneath it all. Beneath the robes and rules, you can sense the occasional eye roll, the private sigh, the itch to gossip about Brother Matthew's suspiciously large cheese stash. These were men, not angels, and silence didn't erase that. It only made it quieter. By midday, the sun bakes the courtyard. You sit by the fountain, watching reflections ripple. The air hums with insects and prayer. For the first time, you stop missing noise. You understand why they chose this. Silence here isn't punishment. It's protection. It guards the mind from chaos, like a moat around a castle of thought. You close your eyes, listening. The world narrows to breath and bell. You think this must be what peace sounded like in the Middle Ages. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of intention. When you open your eyes again, the brothers are heading back toward the dairy. The smell of milk and salt is stronger now. You follow, knowing the next lesson waits there. If silence was their spiritual discipline, cheese was their earthly reward. And maybe, you suspect, not all the monks were equally holy when it came to taste, testing the Lord's dairy bounty. The bell rings again, deep and steady, summoning both prayer and appetite. You feel a grin tug at your lips. Somehow, silence has started to speak to you. You follow the sound of clanging buckets into a long, low building that smells like heaven if heaven were built entirely from warm milk and faint barnyard. This is the dairy, the heart of monastic industry, and unexpectedly, devotion. You stand at the doorway and watch a small army of hooded men moving in quiet rhythm, stirring, straining, pressing. The scene could be from any century, and in a way it is. A monk waves you closer, his hands white with curds. He points toward a row of massive wooden tubs, where milk from the morning's cows still steams faintly. It's the kind of sight that would make a modern health inspector faint. Open air vats, wooden paddles, robes dangerously close to sloshing milk. But the smell, divine. You pick up a ladle and stir. The liquid is warm and thick, already separating into curds and whey. Blessed are the cheesemakers. You think, quoting Monty Python in your head, and instantly feeling guilty about it in this sacred place. You soon learn that for monks, cheese wasn't just a food, it was a discipline. The rule of Saint Benedict might not mention Gouda directly, but it demanded that monasteries be self-sufficient. That meant growing, making, and preserving everything they could, including their own dairy. Cheese, as it turns out, was the perfect miracle of medieval food science, compact, nourishing, long-lasting, and sellable. Historians still argue whether monastic cheesemaking began as necessity or theology. Some say monks made cheese simply because it was practical, others suggest it symbolized spiritual transformation. The turning of milk, the raw gift of the earth, into something refined and enduring. Like the soul, but tastier. You stand beside Brother Hugo, who motions for you to help him lift a muslin sack of curds from the whey. It's heavier than you expect. And when he smiles at your grimace, you catch a flash of humor in his eyes. The monks may live by silence, but their expressions do a lot of the talking. He sets the sack into a circular press, turns a great iron crank, and the whey trickles away in a steady golden stream. Patience, he mouths. And patience is what this place runs on. Every wheel of cheese you see lined up on the shelves has taken weeks, sometimes months, to perfect. In a world before refrigeration, that patience meant survival. The air inside the aging room is thick, humid, alive with bacteria doing their slow, invisible work. You breathe it in and feel your lungs prickle with salt and history. Each wheel bears a faint cross pressed into its rind. Not branding, exactly, but benediction. To make food here was to pray with your hands. Brother Hugo gestures to a smaller wheel and cuts it open. The smell is rich, nutty, slightly sharp, halfway between comfort and challenge. He offers you a piece. You hesitate. Cheese blessed by monks feels like something you should kneel for, but you taste it anyway. It's astonishing, dense, creamy, faintly floral. The kind of flavor that feels like it's been waiting centuries for someone to notice. You nod, eyes watering slightly, and Hugo laughs silently, tapping his stomach. Yes, divine. Now you understand why monasteries became Europe's greatest cheesemakers. Cistercians, Benedictines, and Trappists all perfected their own regional styles. Port du Salut, Maroilles, Gruyere, and even early versions of Parmesan owe their birth to monks who had too much milk and too much discipline. They turned excess into art. And, crucially, into income. See, cheese was more than food. It was currency. Monasteries sold it to nearby villages, pilgrims, and traveling merchants. A monastery with good cheese could afford books, candles, or even new roof tiles. Pray hard, sell harder. You imagine their motto might have been, though they'd phrase it more piously. But of course, every holy industry invites its little sins. There are stories, half joking, half true, of monks sneaking extra tastes, arguing over rennet ratios, even smuggling cheese wheels past abbots to trade for finer wine. One abbot, records say, discovered a brother hiding 2 wheels beneath his robes and demanded an explanation. The monk reportedly replied, I was keeping them warm for the Lord. Still, even the most pious abbeys couldn't avoid the biological chaos of cheesemaking. The process involved animal rennet, enzymes from calves' stomachs, and that raised questions. Was it truly vegetarian? Did it violate fasting rules? Historians still argue about how far monks went to justify their dairy indulgence. Many claimed that since cheese was a transformed product, it wasn't quite meat. A convenient miracle. You watch as Hugo salts the curds with practiced hands. The grains glisten like snow. He hums softly, not a chant, but something older, a tune passed through centuries of repetition. The sound mixes with the creak of wood and the distant drip of whey. For a moment, you forget where you are and simply exist in rhythm with this ancient craft. Lunch approaches, and the bell calls everyone to prayer. Hugo wipes his hands on his robe, nods at you, and heads toward the chapel. You linger, taking in the sight hundreds of cheeses in varying stages of ripeness, some pale as moonlight, others dark and crusted like old treasure. The room hums faintly, as if the air itself is fermenting with devotion. You remember reading once that certain monasteries treated their cheese cellars as holy ground. Only a few brothers were permitted to enter. They believed the fermentation was guided by God. Perhaps it was superstition. Or perhaps they simply recognized that something mysterious, alive and invisible, was happening in those wheels. Out in the courtyard, sunlight floods the stones. You sit with a hunk of bread and a slice of cheese, warm, pungent, magnificent, and realize you've just tasted 1,000 years of patience. You glance at the monks nearby, eating in their quiet rows, and wonder how they could find holiness in something so ordinary. Then again, maybe that's the whole point. Their faith didn't live in cathedrals of marble. It lived in milk, in soil, in the slow, steady work of transforming what the world gave them. A bee drifts past, lazily orbiting your crust of bread. You laugh softly, remembering a line from an old chronicle. God is present even in the curd. It sounds absurd, but after spending a day here, you start to believe it. When the meal ends, the monks rise in silence, and you follow. You can still taste the cheese, its salt lingering like a benediction on your tongue. The next bell rings, a lower tone, summoning them to labor again. Only now do you notice how the day is divided like one long recipe: prayer, work, rest, repeat. Every moment measured, every act an ingredient. Time here doesn't flow, it ferments. You'll soon discover that even time itself was their most sacred creation. The monks didn't just live inside the clock, they built it. But for now, the cheese rests, and so do you, lulled by the rhythm of bells, the hum of patience, and the faint, holy stink of curdled devotion. The next time you wake, it's to the sound of bells again, this time sharper, more insistent, slicing through the cool dawn air, like someone tugging on the fabric of time itself. You've begun to realize these bells don't just mark time here, they make it. You step out into the cloister and see Brother Hugo again, smiling faintly as he tightens the rope that leads up to the tower. He gives it one last pull, and the bell answers with a roar so deep it vibrates in your chest. For a moment, you're not sure if it's still ringing or if your heartbeat has just synced to the sound. Welcome to the world before clocks, where monks became the human metronomes of medieval Europe. The rule of Saint Benedict dictated that prayer and work should divide the day into 8 canonical hours. That meant getting up long before sunrise for matins and lauds, then moving through the day by bells prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. You can barely remember what day it is. They can tell you what minute of devotion you're in. Each bell meant a different thing, and after only a few days, your body starts reacting before your mind does. The low one signals prayer, the high one labor. One long tone means the end of mealtime. 3 short ones mean, hurry, or you'll be skipping dinner and explaining it to God. Historians still argue whether this rigid schedule was born of faith or efficiency. Either way, the effect was revolutionary. Long before the Industrial Revolution chained people to factory hours, monks had already invented the shift system, complete with alarms. And not just for themselves. Nearby villagers often followed monastery bells, using them as the unofficial public clock. You can imagine a baker in the valley listening for the Vespers, toll before pulling his loaves out of the oven. The monks didn't just organize prayer, they organized civilization. Brother Hugo once told you, well, gestured, because actual speech is still rare. That time is the one resource a monk never wastes. And yet, ironically, they seem to have endless amounts of it. Their lives flow like the river you hear just beyond the walls, slow but relentless. You sit by the fountain, watching how the day unfurls exactly on cue. At sunrise, the dairy stirs to life. By mid-morning, the garden fills with soft rustling as monks weed and water. Then the bell again, and they drift toward prayer like birds turning together in the air. It's so synchronized it almost feels rehearsed. But this choreography has been practiced for centuries. You start to feel the rhythm inside yourself too. Without clocks, your body begins to sense time differently. By temperature, by light, by hunger. You notice how your thoughts slow between bells, how moments stretch like cooled wax. It's oddly freeing to surrender to a schedule you didn't make. A monk passes, carrying a small mechanical contraption. It looks like a hybrid between a sundial and an hourglass, held together by brass and optimism. You realize you're looking at one of the earliest attempts to measure time precisely. A kind of proto-clock. Monasteries were among the first places in Europe to experiment with mechanical timekeeping, largely because they needed to keep those prayer hours exact. There's a legend, half fact, half proud rumor, that the world's first mechanical clock was built in a 13th century monastery in England. The monks wanted something more reliable than the sun, since God, in his infinite wisdom, didn't always provide daylight at convenient prayer times. So they made their own solution: gears, weights, and bells, all conspiring to make time obey them. You can almost picture the scene. A group of monks hunched over iron parts in candlelight, testing levers, adjusting chains, praying not just for salvation, but for better accuracy. And when the first clock finally ticked into motion, maybe they heard in it not machinery, but devotion. The heartbeat of discipline itself. The bell tolls again, and Brother Hugo gestures toward the fields beyond the walls. It's labor time. You follow him out into the sunlight, where monks hoe long rows of cabbages in eerie silence. The rhythm of metal on soil mirrors the steady tempo of the bells. You realize even their physical movements are timed, paced, orchestrated. Nothing wasted, nothing rushed. And yet, amid this order, you sense small rebellions. A younger monk hums quietly under his breath, too softly to be scolded, but enough to break the monotony. Another pauses to wipe his brow, lingering a little too long. A smile flickers. Even here, within the gears of divine timekeeping, humanity insists on improvising. You kneel to help plant a few seeds, and the earth feels cold, damp, ancient. Somewhere a bell rings again. It always rings. And the monks straighten in unison, dusting their robes. Time to wash, to pray, to eat. Always the same. Yet somehow never identical. Like the endless spinning of a clock's hand, looping back but always moving forward. In the refectory, lunch unfolds like a ritual. The reader recites scripture while the rest eat in silence. You find yourself watching the rhythm spoon, swallow, listen, breathe. When the final bell rings, all stop instantly, even mid-bite. The spoon in your hand hovers for a second before you set it down too. That's how deep the training runs. Later, as dusk creeps in, you climb the tower with Brother Hugo. The air grows colder the higher you go. Below, the abbey glows golden from the setting sun, its courtyards neat as clock faces. He motions for you to listen. You do, and realize the whole place sounds like a clock, the drip of water in a basin, the thump of a churn, the low murmur of chant. Every detail ticking in time. Tempest Day, Hugo whispers, one of the few times he actually breaks the silence. God's time. You think about that phrase as the final bell tolls over the valley. Its sound carries far, echoing over forests, reaching the distant village lights. You wonder how many people glance up from their work at that moment, guided not by their own watches, but by this ancient rhythm. You lean against the cold stone, feeling the last vibration fade from the bell's rim. The air falls still again, but it's not silence anymore. It's the pause between beats. The monks below file toward the chapel for evening prayer, and you realize something quietly profound. They don't just follow time. They create it. In this world, where each hour has a purpose, and every purpose a sound, life becomes music. Predictable maybe, but deeply, hypnotically human. And as you descend the tower steps, your feet echoing in sync with the bells, you can't help but wonder if time itself were alive. It would probably live here, in stone walls, in patient hands, in the slow, steady hum of monks who measure eternity one ring at a time. Morning again. Or maybe it's evening. You've started losing track, which, in a way, means you're finally adapting to monastic life. Time feels circular now, not linear, like a wheel turning, or like the ringing of bells repeating endlessly into the mist. You rise before the first light and follow the faint glow of a candle through the hallway. The air smells of wax and something faintly herbal, lavender, maybe sage. Brother Hugo is there again, placing the candle on a wooden shelf before bowing his head in prayer. The gesture is so smooth it almost looks rehearsed, yet entirely genuine. Today, he hands you a small wooden tablet. On it, carved neatly, is a Latin inscription Ora et Labora, pray and work, the unofficial motto of Benedictine life. You run your fingers over the letters, feeling the grooves. It's not just a phrase here, it's the architecture of existence. Down in the scriptorium, rows of monks sit bent over parchment. The sound is mesmerizing, quills scratching, pages rustling, the occasional quiet cough. You find yourself lulled by the rhythm of it, the human heartbeat of the Middle Ages. Each monk copies by hand psalms, prayers, bits of Aristotle, maybe even old herbal recipes from forgotten apothecaries. These are the keepers of civilization's memory, preserving knowledge one careful stroke at a time. You watch one of them dip his quill into ink and draw a single perfect letter. The ink glistens wetly for a heartbeat before drying into permanence. You realize this moment is history being made, not in the grand sense, but in the quiet, enduring kind. A younger scribe beside you nudges an inkwell too hard and spills a dark blot across the page. For a moment, everyone freezes. Then, without a word, he takes a fine knife and gently scrapes away the mistake. The sound of the blade on parchment is faint but sharp, like someone erasing time itself. You think of how fragile it all is, these pages, this routine, this world built on silence and patience. A single blot could ruin a week's work. A spark from a candle could erase centuries. And yet, they keep writing every day, every hour, because to them, persistence is faith. In the corner, a master illuminator works under the softest light, painting gold leaf into the edges of a manuscript. The gold catches the light and throws it back into the room, warm and flickering. You can see every brushstroke, every detail of the tiny vines curling around letters. This is the art of slow perfection, each page a devotion. Sometimes, you hear the faint murmur of Gregorian chant drifting from the chapel, beyond the walls. It blends with the sound of quills and bells until it's impossible to tell where one ends and the other begins. The monastery feels less like a building now and more like a living instrument, tuned to the frequency of faith. After a while, Brother Hugo gestures for you to follow. You step into the courtyard, where a thin mist is lifting. The garden lies ahead, still wet with dew. Monks move quietly among the rows of herbs, mint, rosemary, rue, collecting leaves in small baskets. This is the other half of their day labora. Work is sacred here, not a punishment, not a chore. It's the way one aligns with divine rhythm. You watch as they prune vines, feed chickens, tend to bees. Every motion is deliberate, every action part of a pattern. There's a serenity to it all that's difficult to explain. A novice offers you a taste of honey. Thick, golden, faintly floral. It's astonishingly sweet. He smiles shyly before returning to his work. You realize he may have spent the entire morning tending the hives for that single spoonful. A small miracle of patience. You find yourself thinking about the modern world, about how we rush from moment to moment, as if afraid time will run out. But here, it's the opposite. They move as if time were infinite, as if every second deserved its full weight. By noon, the sun stands high over the cloister. The shadows form perfect geometric shapes along the arches, like the hours themselves have taken form. The bell rings again. You've stopped counting how many times it does. You no longer need to. Your body already knows what comes next. Meal, prayer, work, silence, reflection. The cycle continues unbroken. It's both comforting and strange, like being part of a great cosmic breath. Later that evening, Brother Hugo leads you to a small, candlelit room you haven't seen before. In the center stands an enormous wooden wheel, covered in small pegs and gears. It turns slowly, pushed by a system of weights. A primitive timepiece. This, he whispers, is the heart. You watch the wheel rotate. It creaks softly, steady and alive. Every hour, one of the pegs triggers a bell mechanism somewhere above. The sound is faint but unmistakable, the same sound that has guided your days since you arrived. The monks didn't invent time, but they found a way to make it visible. You reach out and touch the wood. It's warm from constant motion. For a moment, you imagine all the hours this wheel has counted, all the sunrises and prayers and quiet evenings it has measured. And then it hits you every tick, every chime, every ring is a heartbeat in the life of an institution that's been breathing for centuries. You step back, and Brother Hugo smiles. Tempus fugit, he says quietly. Time flies. But here you think, maybe it doesn't fly at all. Maybe it flows. As you leave, the last bell of the day tolls across the valley. The sound rolls through the stone halls and into the night air, merging with the chirp of crickets and the rustle of leaves. You look up at the darkening sky. For a brief, suspended moment, you can almost feel the world turning, not rushing, not racing, just turning, patiently, like the wheel. And when the final echo fades, the silence that follows feels like the truest kind of peace. You wake up to the sound of distant bells and the faint aroma of something cooking. Or maybe it's just the ghost of a scent your sleepy brain invents to keep you moving. Either way, it works. You stretch, rub your eyes, and shuffle down the corridor, the stone floor cool beneath your bare feet. The refectory, the monastery's dining hall, waits ahead, lined with long wooden tables scarred by centuries of elbows, bowls, and prayer books. It's dimly lit, but there's a warm amber glow from the candles along the walls. You take a seat among the brothers, and for a moment, it feels like you've slipped through time. A small loaf of bread and a bowl of soup, thin, mostly lentils, are placed before you. Nothing extravagant. A few crusts, a drizzle of oil, maybe a lonely onion slice, yet, strangely, it looks satisfying. No one speaks. Not a whisper. Instead, one monk climbs a small pulpit at the corner of the hall and begins reading scripture aloud. His voice is soft, steady, almost melodic, filling the air like incense. This is how monks, in silence. One voice reading to feed the mind, while the body took in the bare minimum. You take your first spoonful. It's earthy and bland, but comforting in its simplicity. You think of all the rich medieval feasts happening outside these walls. Roasted boar, wine, cheese, honey cakes. And it makes you wonder, why choose this? Because fasting wasn't punishment here. It was training. You see, in monastic life, controlling hunger meant controlling the body, and through that, the soul. Too much pleasure in food was a distraction from prayer. Too much fullness made one sleepy, lazy, unfit for divine service. So, They walked a thin line between nourishment and denial, balancing discipline with survival. Still, you quickly learn that monks, being human, found creative ways around the rules. Take the Lenten fast, for example. During the 40 days before Easter, no meat was allowed. Simple enough, right? But the loopholes were legendary. Fish was fine, of course, but so were beavers. Yes, beavers. Because someone, somewhere, decided their tails counted as fish. Historians still argue whether this was theological genius or dietary delusion. And then there was the monastic cheese loophole. Some abbeys quietly reasoned that cheese wasn't meat. It was a transformation of milk. And since milk came from cows and not from flesh, cheese slipped right through the moral cracks. You can almost picture the abbot's face when he explained this to a skeptical visitor. It's not gluttony. It's protein stewardship. The result: the monks' kitchens became laboratories of holy improvisation. They learned how to stretch ingredients, how to ferment and preserve, how to make a feast out of what others would call scraps. You wander toward the back of the refectory where the lay brothers, those who handled much of the manual labor, prepare the next meal. The air is thick with steam and the smell of simmering herbs. A monk in a worn apron stirs a pot the size of a small cauldron. He gives you a knowing smile and points to a clay jar on the shelf. Inside, pickled vegetables. Next to it, dried mushrooms. Further down, a block of hardened cheese the color of gold. Fasting doesn't mean starving. He whispers with a grin before turning back to his pot. There's a hidden joy in this place, a quiet rebellion against austerity. For every rule, a workaround. For every deprivation, a tiny indulgence. It's human nature, wrapped in robes. And sometimes, those indulgences took comically petty forms. One record tells of a monk in Cluny Abbey who smuggled bits of bacon into his stew during Lent, then claimed it wasn't meat anymore, because it had been so long boiled as to lose its essence. You imagine the smug satisfaction of that monk spooning his non-meat stew, pretending righteousness while savoring rebellion. But there were deeper reasons too. Food was not just sustenance here. It was a spiritual metaphor. Bread represented Christ's body, wine his blood, fasting, a rehearsal for divine longing. Every bite, or lack of one, had meaning. When you eat too little, the world sharpens. The air feels colder, the bells sound clearer, even the prayers sting more deeply. Hunger turns the senses inward, forcing you to listen to silence itself. After the meal, the monks rise together, heads bowed, and file out in a slow, rhythmic line. Their sandals whisper on the floor like waves receding from the shore. Outside in the cloister garden, a few brothers gather near the fig trees. One discreetly reaches into his sleeve and produces, of all things, a tiny wedge of cheese. He breaks it in half and offers you a piece. You hesitate, then take it. It's rich and sharp, with a nutty flavor that melts on your tongue. He winks. It's for contemplation. He murmurs and walks away. So yes, silence is sacred, fasting is holy. But there's a shared understanding that a bit of cheese, quietly enjoyed, never hurt anyone's soul. Later, as the sun dips behind the abbey wall, you wander into the kitchen again. Copper pots hang like ornaments. The hearth glows with dying embers. You see the cook carefully wrapping loaves for tomorrow. He catches your eye and whispers something rare. You know, the saints may have fasted, but the angels must have feasted. It's the kind of line you'll think about long after leaving. Because that's what this place teaches: best balance. Too much indulgence dulls the spirit, too much denial starves it. The monks lived in the in-between, a middle path paved with modest meals, secret smiles, and occasional cheese. As night falls, the refectory stands empty again, lit only by moonlight through narrow windows. The silence returns, not as punishment, but as peace. You can almost feel the hum of prayers still lingering in the air, like invisible warmth. Your stomach grumbles faintly. You laugh under your breath. The monks would call that a reminder to be grateful. You make your way back toward your small cell, pausing at the door to look once more at the flickering light from the kitchen. Maybe holiness, you think, isn't about erasing appetite. Maybe it's about learning when to taste and when to wait. And tonight, you've tasted enough to understand both. You wake before dawn again, this time to a different sound. Soft clinks of wood, a faint bubbling, and the unmistakable smell of yeast and malt drifting through the corridor. It's warm, earthy, and oddly comforting, like someone baked a loaf of bread inside a dream. You follow the scent down a side passage and find yourself in a low, stone-arched room. Barrels line the walls. Copper pots shimmer in the torchlight. Steam curls lazily upward, fogging the narrow window slits. You've stumbled into the monastery's brewery. Brother Matthias, a stout monk with a cheerful round face, nods at you over a vat of frothy liquid. You've found our holiest miracle, he says, stirring with a long paddle. His tone is so serene you almost believe him. He gestures for you to look closer. Inside the vat, a brown, bubbling concoction rolls and hisses gently like a living thing. The smell, rich and grainy, with a faint sweetness, wraps around you like a blanket. Beer, he explains softly. The water of life, because the water was trying to kill us. He's not joking. Medieval water sources were risky, teeming with microbes nobody yet understood. But beer, boiled and fermented, was safe. Even the weakest ale was cleaner than most wells. The monks, ever practical, turned necessity into vocation. Brewing wasn't merely permitted. It became a sacred duty. They drank it during fasts, offered it to travelers, sold the surplus to fund manuscripts and cheesecloth. Some abbeys brewed 3 grades of ale, light for guests, medium for monks, and strong for feasts or the abbot's table. You take a tentative sip from a wooden cup Brother Matthias offers you. It's cloudy, a little sour, and surprisingly refreshing. Liquid bread, he says proudly, and you can taste the grain of truth in that phrase. Historians still argue whether beer first became widespread through monasteries or peasant farms. But what's certain is that monks refined it, measuring, documenting, experimenting. They were the original craft brewers long before hipster pubs existed. Every monastery has its soul. Matthias continues. Oz tastes of barley. He lifts a scoop of dried hops from a basket. The smell is sharp, green, almost citrusy. We discovered this herb keeps the beer from spoiling. God is generous with his preservatives. He laughs. A sound rare enough here to feel sacred in itself. You wander among the barrels as he works, listening to the rhythm of wood against wood, water against fire. It's another form of monastic chant, really, slow, steady, soothing. Each bubble of yeast sounds like a small prayer rising. As you help haul sacks of grain to the mill, Matthias tells you stories passed down from generations of brewers. About Brother Anselm, who accidentally created a dark stout by leaving the malt near the fire too long. About a nun in Flanders who brewed ale so strong it converted, visiting bishops to nap immediately after lunch. About the abbots who quietly became rich, funding abbey expansions through beer sales while claiming it all went to maintenance of divine architecture. The humor is gentle, the pride humble. But you sense the undercurrent. This brew was more than drink. It was economy, community, and, occasionally, rebellion. You rest for a moment on a bench while he ladles the warm wort into barrels for fermentation. The air vibrates with quiet energy, a mix of devotion and yeast. The heat fogs your vision until the entire room feels dreamlike. He hands you another cup. This time it's a weak, old ale, cool, settled, mellow. You sip slowly, letting the taste unfold. Behind it, you sense layers of patience, the same patience that fills their prayers, their gardens, their silences. Some abbots, Matthias says, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Believe beer softens the soul. Makes confession easier. He shrugs. I think it just makes humility taste better. Outside, you hear the bell for terce. Prayer time again. Matthias nods toward the chapel. Leave the brew to rest. He murmurs, as God rests the world. You follow the path through the cloister, light-headed. Not drunk. Just pleasantly warm from the owl and the atmosphere. The chant has already begun by the time you enter. The voices rise and fall, long syllables like waves against stone. You close your eyes. Somewhere under those voices, the bubbles in the brewery still rise and burst. You imagine the harmony between both sounds, sacred words and secular ferment, each performing its quiet miracle. Later, after prayer, you help seal barrels in the cellar. It's cool and dark here, lined with ancient wood. The smell of damp earth mixes with malt. You trace your fingers along one of the barrels. There's a small carving on its side, Deus in minimis. God in the smallest things. You think of yeast, tiny, invisible, transforming the mundane into something joyous. Maybe holiness really does live in small, unseen reactions. As the day drifts toward evening, the monks gather to taste the previous month's batch. It's a ritual, not a party. Though there's laughter, the first real laughter you've heard in days. A few raise their cups with a quiet pax, peace, before drinking. The old tastes stronger now, deeper. Someone passes you a hunk of bread and a wedge of cheese. Yes, cheese again. And the combination is divine in the simplest way. Grain, milk, thyme. All transformed by patience. You realize, as candlelight flickers against their faces, that this isn't mere survival. It's joy disguised as discipline. They've found ways to sanctify flavor, to baptize fermentation, to brew contentment out of monotony. And maybe, in their quiet, clever way, they understood something modern life keeps forgetting, that pleasure doesn't have to be loud to be profound. Before you leave, Matthias wipes his hands on his robe and says, "Remember this, friend. We do not drink to forget the world. We drink to taste it more clearly. Outside, night has settled softly over the cloister. The air is cool and sweet, carrying the faint scent of malt from the open window below. The stars look like pale bubbles rising in the dark sky. You lie in your cell later, drowsy, hearing both the bells and the faint gurgle of fermenting barrels in your mind. They blend into one rhythm, steady, eternal, a lullaby of work, worship, and yeast. Sleep comes slow, like a second fermentation of the soul. The next morning arrives not with bells, but with the gentle scratch of quills, like rain falling indoors. You open your eyes to that soft, rhythmic sound, and for a few moments can't tell whether you're still dreaming. The monastery feels hushed, every wall holding its breath. You follow the faint glow of candles down a long hallway, past shelves stacked with parchment and ink pots, until the sound grows louder. When you step inside the scriptorium, it's like walking into the mind of the Middle Ages itself. Dozens of monks sit bent over wooden desks, each one surrounded by tiny bottles of pigment, goose, feather quills, and stacks of animal skin parchment. The air smells faintly of dust, ink, and tallow smoke. A shaft of morning light cuts through the high window, turning the floating dust motes into golden flecks that seem to shimmer in time with the scratching of pens. Brother Odo, the head scribe, looks up as you enter. His eyes are pale blue, magnified by thick round glasses that make him look permanently astonished. He smiles faintly and motions for you to sit beside him. You've arrived at the quietest storm in Christendom, he whispers. You look down at the page in front of him. A Latin manuscript of St. Augustine's Confessions, written in delicate black script, so precise it looks printed. Every letter is uniform, every margin exact. He dips his quill into ink, taps it twice against the rim, and continues where he left off, the motion so fluid it's hypnotic. This, he murmurs without looking up. is how eternity is copied. He means it literally. These men aren't just writing, they're transmitting faith, knowledge, and sometimes mischief across centuries. Each manuscript takes months, sometimes years. Every mistake must be scraped off with a blade, every illumination painted by hand. You glance to the far corner, where another monk is illuminating a page with blue, red, and gold pigments. His hands are steady as he paints tiny vines around the letter G, which bursts into a swirl of dragons, birds, and flowers. It's not just decoration, it's devotion, a way to turn God's word into beauty. Historians still argue whether this art was pure worship or subtle rebellion, whether those wild colors and imaginary beasts were a secret wink against the uniformity of faith. Either way, it's mesmerizing. A pot of pigment catches the light and flashes gold. You lean closer. Shell gold. Brother Odo says softly, noticing your curiosity. Real gold leaf, ground to dust, mixed with honey. Expensive, yes, but God deserves good ink. You smile at that. And what about mistakes? You ask. He chuckles. Ah, mistakes are where humility enters. He points to a faint smudge in the margin, where a monk centuries ago accidentally dipped his sleeve into wet ink. Instead of scraping it away, he'd drawn a tiny mouse chasing a crumb toward the blot. Even errors can praise creation, Odo says. You find yourself drifting, half listening to the rhythm of quills, half lulled by the warm stillness of the room. You imagine what it must feel like to copy the same verse hundreds of times until the words start dissolving into pure sound, pure rhythm. Like prayer disguised as handwriting, a novice nearby breaks a quill and winces. The sound makes several monks glance up, not in anger, but in gentle sympathy. Brother Odo leans over and hands the boy a new feather, trimmed to perfect sharpness. Again, he says softly, begin again. The ink forgives. The hours slide by unnoticed. You watch them work and realize how this silent labor built the foundations of learning itself. Without these monks, Europe might have forgotten Aristotle, lost Cicero, misplaced half of scripture. Every page is a lifeboat for human thought, drifting across centuries. You find a small shelf labeled bestiarium. You open one of the manuscripts carefully. Inside are illustrations of fantastical animals. Lion-bodied griffins, unicorns grazing under trees, pelicans feeding chicks with their own blood. Some images are so bizarre they look like fever dreams. Others are strangely tender. These creatures, Odo says, looking over your shoulder, teach moral truths. Or that's what we claim. Truth is, I think some brothers just love drawing monsters. There's a glimmer of humor in his voice, and you realize that even here, among vows of silence and discipline, imagination never quite died. At midday, the bell for sext rings. No one moves immediately. They finish their sentences, blow gently on the ink to dry it, and only then rise, stretching stiff fingers. You follow them to the cloister for a short meal, your head still buzzing with the scent of parchment and ink. When you return later, the light has changed. It pours from the west now, thick and golden, turning every page into something holy. The scratch of quills resumes. Someone begins humming faintly, a simple, wordless melody that matches the rhythm of writing. You sit quietly and watch the monks pass pigment pots between them. Dip, write, breathe, repeat. A young scribe leans close and whispers, "Do you know why we write so small?" You shake your head. He smiles. Because the devil cannot read fine print. You nearly laugh out loud, which in this room feels like blasphemy. The hours blend together. Outside, the sky deepens to indigo, and the candles are lit again. The scriptorium glows like a lantern in the dark, a beacon of knowledge against the surrounding wilderness of ignorance. You realize how fragile it all was. One fire, one invasion, one careless spark could have erased centuries of thought. And yet they persisted, copying by hand, trusting that truth, however fragile, was worth preserving. At last, Brother Odo finishes his page. He sets down his quill, flexes his aching fingers, and sighs. "Words are our bricks," he murmurs. "Without them, faith would crumble." You look around at the rows of patient faces, each one glowing in the candlelight. Their world is small, enclosed, repetitive, and yet it built the libraries that later birthed science, philosophy, and art. As you step out into the cool night, you can still hear the faint scratch of a few late scribes working by candlelight. The sound follows you through the hall, soft and steady, like the heartbeat of history itself. And as the last echo fades, you realize something strange. You've stopped thinking of it as tedious. The monotony has turned into a kind of peace. Like ink sinking slowly into parchment, the world outside begins to blur. By the time the sun sets, the monastery has folded itself into silence again. The only sounds are the creak of wooden beams and the faint drip of water somewhere, deep in the cloister. You walk along the stone corridor, candle in hand, its flame wobbling with every draught. The day's rhythm, bells, prayers, writing, has slowed into something softer, dreamlike. Outside, the courtyard is silvered by moonlight. A few monks move quietly between the herb garden and the well, their robes brushing against the gravel like the sound of wings. You follow them out, drawn by the calm of the evening. The air smells faintly of mint and damp stone. Brother Anselm, the gardener, is kneeling beside a patch of sage, his hands sunk into the earth. He looks up as you approach and smiles in that easy, wordless way monks do when silence is still half in effect. He motions for you to kneel beside him. The soil is cool and crumbly, rich with the scent of life and decay. You watch as he trims the herbs carefully, murmuring a blessing under his breath for each plant. "Every leaf," he says softly, "is a small psalm." You find that thought comforting. Even the act of weeding feels like part of prayer here. Nothing is wasted. Not labor, not time, not even silence. Anselm begins pointing out plants, as if introducing old friends. Rue for protection, fennel for digestion, thyme for courage, lavender for sleep. He chuckles at that last one. "We all need that one most," he says. The moonlight catches the silver thread in his hair as he works. You notice how his movements mirror the monks in the scriptorium earlier. Patient, rhythmic, deliberate. Every gesture seems to belong to the same quiet language of devotion. After a while, he stands, brushing soil from his knees. "We tend the garden," he says, "and the garden tends us." Then, as if remembering something, he adds, "Come." The apothecary is still open. You follow him through a narrow door into a small, warm room filled with glass jars, bundles of drying herbs, and the steady hiss of an oil lamp. The air is thick with the mingled scents of rosemary, vinegar, and beeswax. On one table sits a copper still used for distilling oils. On another, a mortar and pestle stained with green residue. Anselm grinds a few dried petals together and mixes them with honey. "For the throat," he explains. "The chant wears it out faster than prayer." He hands you a small spoonful. It tastes sharp and sweet, like medicine pretending to be dessert. He gestures toward the shelves. Everything here heals something. If not the body, then the spirit. You scan the jars, labels written in tiny Latin script: salvia, rosmarinus, papava melissa. Each one feels like a piece of alchemy, a blend of faith and early science. "This," Anselm says, tapping one jar, "is for melancholy. Dried lemon balm and rose hips. But the best cure for sadness," he pauses, smiling, "is work done with love." You nod, though you suspect he already knows you agree. The monks here seem to have discovered a secret modern people forgot. That quiet repetition can be its own kind of peace. He pours hot water into 2 earthen cups and drops a pinch of herbs in each. Steam curls upward, carrying a scent of citrus and earth. You sip it slowly, and the warmth spreads through you. As you drink, Anselm begins to tell a story, not loudly, but in the slow, Measured tone of someone used to reading aloud in candlelight. "When I first came here," he says, "I thought holiness meant noise. Bells, hymns, sermons. But holiness hides best in ordinary things. In ink, in dirt, in the space between words. You look around at the jars, the herbs, the dim glow of the lamp, and realize how right he is. Nothing in this room feels grand, yet everything feels sacred." After a pause, he adds, "The saints were gardeners too, in their way. They tended souls instead of soil. We just work closer to the roots." Outside, the wind stirs the trees, and somewhere in the distance, the monastery bell tolls once. A single, soft note marking the start of Compline, the night prayer. Anselm blows out the lamp. "Come," he whispers. The day must end properly. You follow him through dark corridors, lit by small niches of candlelight. The air feels cooler now, and each step echoes faintly on the flagstones. The chapel door creaks as it opens. Inside, the monks are already gathered, seated in long wooden stalls. The only light comes from a single row of candles along the altar, their flames trembling slightly as if breathing. The chant begins. Not loud, not solemn, but slow and deep, rising and falling like the sea. The Latin words are old enough to have lost their meaning, but their rhythm still carries something human and eternal. You sit in the back, listening. The melody seems to dissolve into the air, blurring with the flicker of the candles, with the sound of your own breathing. For a long time, you just let it wash over you. Then you realize the chant isn't perfect. Some voices waver. One brother comes in late, another forgets a line. But somehow, that makes it more beautiful. Because in their small imperfections, these monks sound real, alive, human. The hymn continues until the candles burn low, and the final amen fades into silence. The brothers bow their heads together, then rise and file out one by one, their robes brushing softly across the stone floor. You remain seated for a while, watching the smoke twist from the extinguished wicks. It curls upward, then disappears into the high, dark rafters. When you finally step outside, the moon is high, bathing the cloister in pale light. The herbs in the garden glisten with dew. Somewhere, a night bird sings. You breathe in the cool air, and feel that strange medieval stillness settling over you again. A peace built not on excitement, but on the slow comfort of repetition. And as you walk back toward your cell, candle flickering in your hand, you realize that history, in places like this, never truly sleeps. It just hums softly in the dark, keeping time with the heartbeats of those who refuse to forget. You close the door behind you, lie down on your straw mattress, and listen to the last sounds of the monastery drifting through the hallways. The sigh of wind, the faint crackle of a dying candle. Your thoughts begin to blur into dreams. And somewhere between waking and sleep, you think you hear the echo of Brother Odo's quill, still scratching away, line after line, as if the world could be written into peace. The morning begins not with bells, but with an unusual sound laughter. It ripples down the stone corridor like a forbidden melody, startling the usual hush of the monastery. You pause mid-step, unsure whether to smile or hide. In a place built on silence, laughter feels like thunder. You turn the corner to find a small group of novices in the cloister, huddled around a cracked jug of milk. One of them, Brother Peter. Young, freckled, and hopelessly earnest, has somehow managed to spill most of it onto the floor. He's trying to mop it up with his robe, and another monk, twice his age, is trying very hard not to laugh again. It's such a small thing, a bit of clumsiness, but the sound of it, that snicker echoing off stone, feels like rebellion. A soft rebellion, yes, but one that reminds you that even the holiest men have to breathe between prayers. The older monk finally straightens and mutters, "May the Lord forgive our joy." Then, under his breath, "And our milk," you catch the grin before he hides it again. For the rest of the morning, The mood feels lighter. You see brothers exchanging small, secret smiles during prayers, shoulders shaking slightly under their habits. It's like a breeze passing through a still room. Brief, harmless, necessary. But by midday, the abbot notices. He stands at the head of the refectory during dinner, hands folded, gaze sharp. His voice is quiet, but carries easily. A cheerful heart is a gift, he begins, but laughter, too loud, can scatter prayer like leaves before the wind. The monks lower their eyes, chastened. You sense that most of them will forget this warning by nightfall. You return to your seat, a wooden bench polished by decades of silent meals, and stare at the bowl of lentil stew in front of you. The smell of onions and herbs wafts up, comforting, grounding. Around you, spoons scrape, bread breaks softly, and no one speaks. This is the refectory rhythm again. One bell, one bite, one breath at a time. Then, somewhere in the middle of the meal, a muffled cough breaks the silence. Another monk sneezes. Faintly, someone hiccups. It's like watching ripples spread across water. The abbot's eyes narrow. You suppress a smile. Later that evening, you find Brother Matthew in the cloister garden, standing beside the sundial. He looks up when he hears you approach. You heard about the laughter, he asks, half smiling. You nod. It happens every few months, he admits. The silence starts to crack. We try to be patient, but sometimes the quiet just gets too loud. He gestures toward the sky, now painted gold by the setting sun. You start hearing your own thoughts echo, and that's when you know you're due for a mistake. A laugh, a word, a song hummed when no one's listening. He leans closer. Last winter, one of us started whistling. In the chapel, during matins. You raise an eyebrow. An old drinking tune, he adds, grinning. He swore it just slipped out. Historians still argue whether these small breaches, laughter, chatter, even harmless songs, were truly punished harshly or quietly overlooked. Some accounts describe days of penance for a single misplaced word. Others suggest abbots turned a blind eye, knowing too much silence can break a man. Silence, Matthew says, isn't just the absence of sound. It's a mirror. Some monks look into it and see God. Others see themselves. And that's harder. He walks away, leaving you to think about that. As twilight deepens, you return to your cell, only to find a folded scrap of parchment on your pillow. It reads, "Midnight in the kitchen. Bring your quietest footsteps." You hesitate for a moment, but curiosity wins. When the monastery is asleep, you slip through the corridors like a shadow, candle in hand. The kitchen door creaks as you open it. Inside, a handful of monks sit around the hearth, grinning like schoolboys caught out after curfew. Brother Peter waves you over. Welcome to the midnight chapter of cheese appreciation. On the table lies a modest feast. Small wheels of cheese, a jug of ale, a few apples. Nothing scandalous. Just the forbidden joy of flavor shared in secret. You sit down, and for the first time, the silence doesn't feel sacred. It feels companionable. The monks don't talk much, but their smiles do the speaking. One of them slices into a wheel of pale, soft cheese. The aroma fills the room, sharp, buttery, almost sweet. You take a piece, and it melts instantly on your tongue. Brother Peter whispers, "From the cow of St. Agatha's field. We churned it yesterday." He looks absurdly proud. The monks chuckle softly, and for a moment, you can almost imagine you're in a tavern, not a monastery. "Do you ever think?" You whisper, God minds. Brother Matthew, across the table, shakes his head. "No," he says, voice low. "Only if we forget to be grateful." The group nods, and someone murmurs a brief grace. Then you all eat again, slower this time, savoring the moment. The warmth from the hearth makes the room hazy. Shadows dance across the walls. Someone hums, just a note or two, and no one stops him. After a while, you realize you're tired. But it's a good kind of tired. the kind that comes from being both fed and forgiven. As you leave the kitchen, the hallways seem softer somehow, less severe. Maybe the monastery needs its cracks. The laughter, the whispered jokes, the stolen cheese, so the light can seep through. By the time you return to your cell, dawn isn't far off. You blow out your candle and lie back, still smiling faintly. The next morning, the abbot doesn't mention the missing cheese. He only announces that today's sermon will be on moderation. You and the others exchange guilty glances, but he never looks your way. Perhaps he remembers his own nights in the kitchen. Perhaps every abbot once laughed too loudly. And as the day unfolds, you notice that the monastery feels different, lighter again, as if some small pressure valve has been released. The prayers sound warmer, the silences gentler. You realize that holiness doesn't always mean perfection. Sometimes it just means continuing, chanting, working, laughing, even breaking the rules a little, and finding God somewhere in between. By sunset, the bells ring for vespers. Their tone is steady, measured, but beneath it, you can almost hear something else, a faint hum of contentment running through the cloisters. You smile, and it feels perfectly right that holiness might sometimes sound like chuckle echoing through the dark. The morning air smells faintly of wet hay and river wind when you step outside the cloister gate. For the first time in days, the great wooden doors stand open. That's unusual. The monastery, usually wrapped tight in its shell of silence and stone, is preparing to receive visitors. Beyond the gate, the world stretches out in layers of mist and distant hills. A narrow road snakes toward the abbey, muddy, rutted, and alive with movement. Pilgrims, traders, and a few curious townsfolk trudge closer, their feet squelching in the muck. You can hear their chatter long before they arrive. It feels almost scandalous, this noise of the world intruding on the hush of holy ground. A monk beside you sighs softly. They bring dust and sin. He mutters, but also stories. You smile at that. The abbey depends on these visitors more than anyone likes to admit. The pilgrims bring coins, gossip, relics, and news, strands of the outside world woven into the monastery's patient rhythm. Without them, the abbey would be an island with no tide. You watch as the first of them crosses the threshold, a barefoot woman, clutching a bundle wrapped in linen. Inside, you glimpse a small carved saint, her offering for the chapel. Behind her, a group of weary travelers bow deeply, their eyes wide at the sight of so many silent, hooded figures waiting to greet them. Brother Thomas, the porter, steps forward. He bows slightly, gestures toward the wash basin, and offers them bread. His hands move gracefully, wordlessly. You remember that even hospitality here is choreographed through silence. The gestures feel like fragments of an old, sacred dance. Pilgrims walk to lose their burdens. Thomas murmurs, once the newcomers are seated. Sometimes they find them again here, only lighter. Inside the guest hall, straw mattresses line the walls. The air is heavy with the smell of travel, wet cloaks, leather, and fatigue. A fire crackles in the hearth, though its warmth barely reaches the corners of the vast room. You sit quietly among the visitors, listening as they whisper to one another. One man, his feet wrapped in bandages, claims he's walked from Canterbury. Another boasts that his blister shaped itself into the face of Saint Cuthbert. Miracle enough. His friend jokes, and they both laugh softly until a monk's glance silences them. It's strange, this meeting of two worlds, the restless and the still, the talkative and the silent. Yet somehow, they fit together like two halves of a prayer. As dusk falls, you wander outside again. Near the stables, a cart creaks under the weight of barrels. All from the abbey's own brewery, destined for sale in nearby towns. The monks who load it move efficiently, but you notice their eyes dart toward the open gate now and then. You can tell they envy the travelers, just a little. Brother Matthew appears beside you, wiping his hands on his robe. "We make our vows to stay," he says, "but we dream of going. You ask if monks ever leave. Sometimes," he admits. "They call it apostasy." He smirks faintly. "But I think of it as homesickness turned inside out." Historians still argue whether medieval monks were truly cut off from the world or quietly embedded in its heartbeat. Some abbeys grew rich through trade, others hid smugglers in their ranks. A vow of poverty didn't always mean living poorly. It sometimes meant managing wealth without letting it stain the soul. Later that evening, a merchant arrives, his cloak dusted with road grime, his breath smelling faintly of cloves. He kneels before the abbot, offering a sealed letter and a pouch that clinks softly. The abbot receives both with calm grace, then gestures toward the refectory. Supper, it seems, will be shared. You follow the procession inside, where bowls of pottage and wedges of pale cheese await. The merchant talks freely, too freely, while the monks listen in polite silence. He speaks of markets in Bruges, of ships from Genoa, of the new fashion for pepper and silk. When he mentions the Pope's recent decree on indulgences, you see a ripple of unease pass through the monks. The world beyond these walls, you realize, is changing fast. And change has a way of seeping through even the thickest stone. After dinner, the merchant is led to the guest quarters, where he'll sleep among pilgrims and beggars alike. As the doors close, the abbot lingers, staring into the dim firelight. His lips move soundlessly in prayer, but you suspect his thoughts are elsewhere, on trade routes, taxes, and royal decrees. Outside, night has fallen. You wander the cloister walk, where candlelight spills through narrow windows, painting gold stripes on the flagstones. The hum of the world still clings to you. The smell of road dust, the echo of laughter, the murmur of foreign tongues. A faint movement catches your eye. Near the gate, Brother Peter is speaking with a young pilgrim, a woman dressed in plain wool, her hood drawn low. You can't hear their words, but the tilt of his head, the way his hands fidget at his side, tells you everything. You wait until she leaves, vanishing into the dark road beyond. Peter lingers, staring after her. When he turns and sees you, his face flushes. She wanted directions. He mutters quickly, "That's all." You nod, pretending to believe him, but his eyes give him away. They're the same eyes that glow during prayers, the same that sparkle when he laughs over cheese. They've just discovered another kind of devotion, one the rule doesn't account for. You leave him there, caught between duty and something dangerously human. As you walk back through the sleeping cloister, you think of all the invisible threads tying this monastery to the wider world. Pilgrims, merchants, secret affections. The abbey breathes because the world outside does. By the time you reach your cell, you realize that silence, for all its beauty, can't hold everything. It cracks when love or laughter or longing presses too hard against it. And yet, perhaps that's the point. Maybe the silence isn't meant to be perfect, only patient. Outside, the gate closes once more. The world is shut out again. But tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you can still hear its echo humming faintly in the dark. The next few days pass in a hush so deep it almost hums. The gates stay closed, the pilgrims gone, the merchants vanished into the dust of the road. But the monastery doesn't return fully to peace. Not quite. Beneath the smooth surface of psalms and prayers, you sense a ripple, soft human, and a little guilty. It begins, as many small rebellions do, with food. In the refectory, the meals are meager as ever. Thin pottage, black bread, cheese shaved so fine you can almost see through it. Lent has begun, and with it, the slow ritual of denying the body. Fish replaces meat, milk is rationed, and the air smells faintly of boiled herbs and quiet misery. You sit with the brothers as they eat in silence. A lector reads from the scriptures, voice steady and monotone. Man shall not live by bread alone. he recites. You glance down at your bowl and think grimly that you're barely living by that, either. But not everyone is so obedient. That night, you follow the faint glow of a candle to the kitchen. Inside, Brother Peter is at it again. His hands move deftly, almost gleefully, as he stirs something thick and golden in a small pot. Butter. The forbidden treasure of fasting season. He looks up when he hears you and grins. God made cows, he whispers, so I think he approves. You lean closer, catching the scent, rich, warm, and wildly unholy. You'll get caught, you murmur. Only if you tell, he replies, offering you a piece of bread. You hesitate just long enough to make it look virtuous before taking a bite. It tastes like heaven. Butter melts over your tongue, and suddenly, you understand the temptation of the flesh that sermons warn about. Hunger isn't just for food. It's for warmth, for color, for comfort in a world built on stone and silence. Historians still debate how strictly monks truly kept their fasts. Records show both severe asceticism and blatant indulgence. Some abbeys were infamous for their lavish feasts, while others lived like saints on barley and air. One chronicler from the 12th century complained that monks, as if tomorrow were forbidden by God. Another wrote, "A man cannot sing psalms on an empty stomach." You suspect both were right. Peter scrapes the last of the butter from the pot and wipes it clean with a cloth, hiding the evidence. The abbot thinks holiness lives in hunger, he says quietly. But hunger just makes men dream of food. He blows out the candle, and you both slip back into the corridor. The smell of butter clings to your hands, faint but incriminating. The next morning, the abbot announces stricter fasting rules. Someone, it seems, reported the midnight cooking. Peter keeps his face carefully blank, but you can see the twitch of guilt, or amusement, at the corner of his mouth. That evening, during compline, the chanting feels heavier, as though the voices themselves are weighed down with hunger and regret. You begin to notice more small cracks in the monastery's facade. Brother Matthew, once a model of discipline, lingers in the cloister garden long after curfew, staring at the stars. Brother Thomas, the porter, hoards small luxuries, an apple here, a scrap of parchment there, and even the abbot, stern as stone, spends long minutes before the cheese cellar door, as though considering a sin he's already forgiven himself for. Temptation, you realize, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just sighs. A week later, the air buzzes with another rumor. Someone has found a letter, a love letter, tucked between the pages of a psalter in the scriptorium. The handwriting is elegant, the ink perfumed faintly with lavender. It isn't signed, but the novices whisper names anyway. Brother Peter, Brother Matthew, a pilgrim woman, a lay sister. No one knows. No one dares ask. The abbot calls it a worldly distraction, and orders the letter burned. But not before every monk has imagined the story behind it. You can't help wondering too. Love, like hunger, finds its way through even the thickest walls. Maybe it isn't about disobedience. Maybe it's just the body remembering what it means to be alive. Later that night, as rain lashes the windows, you hear footsteps outside your cell. Soft. Careful, guilty. You open the door a crack and see Brother Peter again, holding a small wedge of cheese wrapped in linen. He hesitates, then presses it into your hand. For survival, he whispers, smiling. You don't argue. You sit on your bed, candle flickering, and break off a piece. It's sharp and salty, aged perfectly. The kind of cheese only monks can make, born of patience, silence, and mild defiance. You take a bite and imagine centuries of hands doing the same thing. Monks who whispered prayers and curses and laughter in equal measure. Outside, thunder rolls over the hills. You think of the abbot in his chamber, probably praying for purity of heart, while secretly dreaming of butter. You think of the burned love letter, its smoke curling heavenward like an unanswered prayer. and you think of all the things these men gave up. Comfort, love, choice, and how, even in their surrender, the human spirit keeps finding ways to taste the world. By dawn, the storm has passed. The bell rings for matins. Low and steady. You file into the chapel with the others, eyes half shut from lack of sleep. The chant rises again, smooth as honey, washing the night's guilt clean. The abbot begins his sermon on restraint, but his voice is gentler this time. Discipline, he says, is not about denial, but direction. Even the heart must learn where to kneel. You glance at Peter across the aisle. He looks up just then, catches your eye and grins. The faintest, most dangerous smile in the monastery, and somehow that makes the silence afterward feel more honest. Because holiness, you realize, isn't about erasing hunger or love or laughter. It's about learning how to live with them without drowning. When the bells finally ring for work, the air smells faintly of damp grass and forgiveness. You step into the courtyard and feel the sun warming the stones beneath your feet. Somewhere in the kitchen, a faint, buttery scent drifts through the hall. You pretend not to notice. You wake before dawn to the scent of something familiar: smoke, milk, and salt. The monastery's cheese cellar is alive again. It's been a week since the fasting rules loosened, and already the monks are back to what they do best: transforming humble milk into something almost holy. You pull your robe tighter against the chill and follow the sound of clinking pails. In the courtyard, the dairy crew moves like clockwork. A few monks carry copper vats steaming in the morning light, while others stir curds with long wooden paddles. Every motion feels ancient, half craft, half prayer. Brother Odo, the cheese master, spots you and gestures for you to join him. His hands are stained pale from years of brine and rennet, and his beard smells faintly of smoke and whey. "You're just in time," he says, grinning. "We're birthing another saint." You raise an eyebrow. "A saint?" He laughs softly. "Every wheel has a name, not of people, of days. Today's curd will be Saint Hildegard." You glance around at the other wheels stacked along the cool stone wall. Each bears a faint inscription: Saint Lawrence, Saint Agnes, Saint Bernardus. Dozens of silent saints, aging patiently in their salted tombs. The monks move carefully through the steps, heating, cutting, pressing, salting. The smell is sharp and earthy. Somewhere, a faint melody hums through the air, one of the brothers humming under his breath. Odo pretends not to notice. "You'd be surprised how far our cheese travels," he says, lowering his voice. "Merchants take it to fairs in Flanders, to Paris, even across the Alps. We trade holiness for coin, one wheel at a time." He isn't joking. Monastic cheese was one of the great exports of the Middle Ages. Abbeys in France, Italy, and Switzerland perfected recipes that still bear their names: Port, Du, Salut, Abbaye de Tamie, Saint Nectaire, Fontina, and more. These weren't just foods. They were signatures, edible prayers that outlived their makers. Historians still argue whether monks truly invented these recipes or merely perfected what peasants began. But there's no debate about one thing: monastic cheese kept the lights on. Without it, many abbeys would have gone dark centuries sooner. Odo chuckles as he ladles curds into molds. "God feeds the soul," he says, "but cheese feeds the abbey." Later that morning, you join a small procession headed to the village below the hill. A cart creaks ahead, piled with freshly pressed wheels wrapped in linen. The monks walk barefoot beside it, chanting softly, their voices blending with the low rumble of wheels on dirt. The village market is already stirring when you arrive. Stalls overflow with vegetables, woven baskets, pottery. The air is thick with the smell of hay and wood smoke. When the villagers see the monks, they bow, not just from reverence, but gratitude. The abbey's cheese, butter, and I'll keep this little world alive. Brother Thomas handles the trade quietly. A few wheels of cheese for sacks of grain. a barrel of oil for lamp oil. A handshake seals each deal. No parchment. No contracts. Only trust built on years of silence and honest milk. As the market bustles, you overhear whispers about monastic cheese across Christendom. French travelers speak of Sikh tiocs and Mont des cats. Italians brag about Grana Padano and Parmigiano. The English praise Glastonbury cheese, once prized by kings. It's as if every abbey has its own flavour of holiness. One merchant grins as he slices a sliver from a wheel marked with the abbey's seal. "There's no taste like monk's patience," he says, and the crowd laughs. You watch as children nibble, as old women close their eyes to savour, as farmers barter their eggs for one more wedge. It's strange, you think, how something born of silence speaks so loudly in the language of pleasure. When the day ends, the monks pack what's left and begin the long walk home. The sky burns orange over the fields. You glance back and see villagers still lingering, holding the last crumbs like relics. Back at the abbey, Odo stores the day's trade in the ledger. "God's work," he says with a wink. "The surprisingly profitable." That night, as you walk through the cool corridors, the scent of ripening cheese seeps through the air. It mingles with the smell of candle wax and ink, the essence of the monastery itself. You pause by the cheese cellar. Inside, the wheels rest on wooden shelves, their rinds darkening slowly. They look like sleeping planets, each one quietly shaping the world outside. You think of how these recipes travel farther than the monks who made them. How a bite of cheese in Paris or Venice might carry the echo of a chant sung in this very room. Food as memory, flavor as faith. Centuries later, those same monastic cheeses will survive wars, reforms, and revolutions. They'll appear on royal tables, in peasant homes, in modern supermarkets. The monks who made them will be long gone, but their craft, measured, patient, devout, will live on in every rind and crumble. Odo once said each wheel was a saint. You're beginning to believe him. Saints, after all, aren't defined by perfection, but persistence. They last. Outside, the night bell tolls. You linger a moment longer, breathing in the cool, tangy air. Somewhere in the dark, a mouse squeaks. A good omen, perhaps. The monks would joke that even the mice here are pious. They fast during Lent. You smile at the thought and make your way back to your cell. The wind through the cloister arches smells faintly of milk and smoke, a scent you'll remember long after this night. And as you lie down, you realize something simple and beautiful. The monk's obsession with cheese wasn't greed, or even indulgence. It was devotion made tangible, a quiet alchemy of patience and faith, turning the ordinary into the eternal. You close your eyes, and the last thing you hear is the low hum of the ripening room, the slow, living breath of history itself. The next morning arrives soft and silver, the kind of dawn that seeps through mist, rather than cuts through it. You wake to the gentle clang of the bell, and the distant coo of doves nesting in the abbey eaves. It's quieter than usual, even for a monastery. The air feels hushed, reverent, as if the walls themselves are holding their breath. You soon learn why. Today is a silent retreat. The abbey will observe a full day of grand silence. No speech, no humming, no idle chatter. Only gestures, bells, and the soft scrape of sandals across stone. You remember how the monks had explained it. Once words were useful for prayer, but silence was a higher form of it. To speak was to disturb the air. To remain silent was to let it breathe. You had laughed at the time. How could anyone go a full day without talking? But now, standing in the cool corridor, as the brothers file silently past, you sense the gravity of it. Brother Anselm passes you a small wooden token. Carved into it is a single word: pax, peace. You tuck it into your sleeve and follow him toward the chapel. The floor creaks underfoot. Even that feels too loud. Inside, candles flicker against the stone. Dozens of monks kneel, heads bowed, faces lit in amber light. No one speaks. Yet the air hums with unspoken thought. You kneel too, and in the stillness, your own breathing feels amplified, like a tide rolling in and out. Historians still argue whether these vows of silence were ever truly absolute. Some abbeys allowed a few spoken words at dawn or dusk. Others replaced speech with elaborate sign language. Either way, silence wasn't a punishment. It was a discipline. It carved out space for the divine to echo. You watch as one monk silently signals another, with a few deft gestures, a cupped hand for water, 2 fingers crossed for bread. It's graceful, almost like dance. Monks in certain orders developed entire vocabularies this way, over 100 signs, refined across centuries. The Cistercians, in particular, were famous for their silent sign language. You imagine medieval scholars today trying to decode these gestures like linguistic archaeologists. By mid-morning, the abbey's rhythm has slowed to something dreamlike. The refectory is silent, except for spoons tapping wooden bowls. The smell of lentil soup and herbs hangs heavy. You can hear the faint crack of firewood, the drip of melted wax. When you glance up, Brother Odo catches your eye. He winks. It's a small rebellion, but in the hush, it feels like thunder. You almost laugh. But then remember, laughter's off, limits too. You think back to how much of monastic life is shaped by absence. Absence of sound, of meat, of luxury, even of comfort. And yet, that absence builds something dense and radiant inside them. Maybe silence isn't emptiness. Maybe it's a kind of pressure that forges clarity. After the meal, the monks file back to their duties. You help in the garden, trimming herbs in the faint winter sun. The sound of shears snipping and leaves rustling becomes a kind of music. You can hear things you normally wouldn't: bees, wind through the olive trees, the faint drip of water from a distant fountain. Brother Arid kneels beside you, pulling weeds. He doesn't speak, but he hums, very softly. You can't tell if it's accidental or deliberate. The tune is almost invisible, just a thread of vibration in the air. For a moment, it feels like a shared secret between you and the world. In that silence, your thoughts begin to wander. You start to notice how sound never truly disappears. It hides. The world is full of tiny noises: the friction of fabric, the scrape of wood, the heartbeat in your ear. The monks, you realize, have simply tuned themselves to hear them. By afternoon, you're in the scriptorium again, copying a passage from Saint Benedict's rule. The section reads, "Let your words be few and seasoned with grace." You underline it absently. Grace through fewer words. What a radical concept in a world that never stops talking. A few hours later, you join the monks for evening prayer. The light outside turns honey, gold, filtering through stained glass and setting dust motes ablaze. For a long time, there's only silence. Then, one by one, the monks begin to chant. Their voices rise together like breath after long restraint. It's hauntingly beautiful. The sound of silence breaking itself. You can feel it vibrate in your chest, deep and low, the way thunder hums before rain. When the final note fades, no one moves. The air is thick with something indescribable, peace, maybe, or awe. Then, gently, they bow and disperse. As you step outside, you find yourself whispering a single word, testing your voice. Amen. It sounds foreign after a day of stillness. The syllables roll softly through the cloister, almost shy. You think of how the monks view silence, not as escape from the world, but as a way to hear it more clearly. Their quiet isn't isolation. It's connection refined. Even centuries later, we still crave that same silence. We plug in white noise, ASMR, sleep sounds, modern versions of monastic hush. You smile at the irony. The monks would have loved your fan humming by the bed. That night, lying in your cell, you hear the faintest sounds drifting through the abbey. The creak of a door, the rustle of a robe, the whisper of wind through cracks in the wall. Each noise feels deliberate, like punctuation marks in an unwritten prayer. Before you drift off, You think about how humans chase peace in noise, in motion, in endless chatter. But the monks, centuries before you, found it by subtracting everything unnecessary, until only breath and heartbeat remained. Silence isn't absence, you realize. It's presence, magnified. You wake to the faint toll of the morning bell, its echo spreading softly across the fields like ripples in a bowl of milk. The monastery stirs again, its rhythm as steady as breath. The smell of smoke, parchment, and ripening cheese drifts faintly from the lower halls. You've grown used to it now, the scent of patient labor, of time condensed into flavor and faith. Outside, mist clings low over the valley. The world beyond the abbey walls feels far away, as if centuries themselves have folded inward. You walk through the cloister slowly, feeling each footstep resonate through the flagstones. The silence from yesterday lingers like perfume. Thin, invisible, but present in everything. Today, the monks are celebrating their feast, not of saints or martyrs, but of their own endurance. It's the day they reflect on why they live this way, why they choose simplicity, repetition, and restraint. You find yourself wondering the same thing. What makes a life like this so strangely magnetic? Brother Odo greets you with his familiar grin. He's already been up for hours. In one hand, he holds a small wheel of cheese, still damp from brine. In the other, a wooden bowl of honey. Breakfast, he mouths, though even now his voice stays low, respectful. You sit together in the garden while the fog begins to lift. Birds are singing somewhere beyond the orchard wall, and a few bees dance lazily among the lavender bushes. Odo cuts the cheese into wedges, its pale interior smooth and glistening. He drizzles a little honey over your slice. You bite in, salty sweet, and a little smoky. It tastes like stone and patience. Odo nods at your reaction. All lives, he finally says, like this cheese. They look plain from the outside. But if you wait long enough, if you let time and silence do their work, you'll taste what's hidden underneath. You almost laugh at how easily he turns breakfast into theology. But he's right. The monk's world is one of slow transformations, milk into cheese, silence into song, ordinary time into something eternal. Their whole existence is an act of fermentation. After breakfast, you wander the abbey one last time, through the scriptorium where quills scratch faintly, past the dormitory, where folded robes line the benches, into the chapel, where light spills through stained glass in shades of ruby and gold. Historians still argue whether monasteries truly preserved civilization after the fall of Rome or simply slowed its decay. But standing here, watching the monks go about their tasks, you see how every copied manuscript, every wheel of cheese, every quiet prayer stitched the seams of a fragile world back together. This abbey isn't just a sanctuary, it's a memory engine, a machine for turning chaos into rhythm, hunger into nourishment, and noise into stillness. Later, you help carry supplies to the cellar, sacks of salt, barrels of oil, bundles of herbs. The air grows cooler as you descend. The walls are lined with wheels of cheese, glowing faintly in the torchlight like moons orbiting their own quiet planet. You trail your fingers across their rough rinds, feeling the small variations between each one. No two are like people shaped by the same hands but aged differently. In one corner, a tiny wheel is marked with your initials. Brother Odo must have done it while you weren't looking. It sits there beside the others, indistinguishable except for that faint carving. Let it rest, he says. Let time do what you can't. You nod. The afternoon passes in gentle routine. Bells mark the hours. The monks chant, pray, and tend to the garden. There's no rush, no striving. Everything unfolds as it always has, and always will. You realize that, for all their vows, poverty, chastity, obedience, the monk's real devotion is to continuity. To doing the same things the same way, until those acts become eternal. You think of how they turned necessity into ritual cheese, making into prayer, silence into art, labor into meditation. Each repetition isn't mindless, it's mindful. The world outside may chase novelty, but the monks chase depth. As twilight falls, you stand once more on the cloister steps. The wind smells of rain and wood smoke. A single candle burns in the chapel window, flickering gently. You can hear faint chanting, the day's final prayers melting into the night. You close your eyes and listen. The voices rise and fall, ancient and calm. You can almost hear the centuries stacked behind them. Countless monks breathing in unison, their songs woven through time like threads of light. And then the wind carries a familiar scent, cheese aging in the cellar, wax melting on an altar, herbs drying by the hearth. The monastery's true incense. You smile. The world beyond these walls may never understand why monks obsessed over milk, silence, and discipline. But you do. You've lived it now. The rhythm, the restraint, the quiet joy of simple devotion. Before heading to your cell, you glance once more toward the cheese cellar. Inside, your little wheel rests patiently on its shelf, surrounded by 1,000 others. You know you'll never see it mature. But that's the point, isn't it? The monks never worked for themselves. They worked for whoever would come after. That thought stays with you as you lie down, the night pressing gently against the walls, and slowly you begin to drift. The world fades to a hush now. The candle beside your bed burns low, its flame a slow heartbeat in the dark. Outside, rain begins to fall, a fine, steady rhythm against the stone. It sounds almost like distant chanting. Your thoughts drift like mist through the abbey corridors. Touching on all the little details, you've seen the clink of copper vats, the glow of candlelight over parchment, the faint sweetness of milk turning into something sacred. Every sound, every smell, every quiet breath feels softened now, blurred at the edges like a dream you don't want to wake from. The monks are asleep, each one folded neatly into his rhythm of rest. The world, too, seems to pause in reverence. You can almost hear the cheese cellar sighing in the dark, the slow work of time continuing beneath the earth. You breathe in deeply, the air cool and faintly sweet. The silence feels enormous, but gentle. It doesn't press on you, it holds you. You realize that this stillness, this calm weight of centuries, has settled inside you too. Your heartbeat slows. The wind brushes faintly through the window slit, carrying the smell of wet grass and smoke. It's enough now. Enough sound, enough memory, enough motion. The monks would say that all things ripen when they're ready. Cheese, silence, and even rest. So let the day melt away. Let your thoughts soften and settle. Let sleep come, slow and sure, like honey dripping from a spoon. The bell will ring again someday, but not tonight. Tonight, there is only quiet, only peace, only you sweat dreams.